Hi, everyone, and welcome to Culture Road Podcast, a show that explores issues that shape our culture today. I'm Angela Mosley, and joining me on Culture Road, as always, are my co-hosts, George Orwell and Philip Burrell. Our guest today is Erin Latham, and she'll give a brief bio, a little bit about her and her background, and then we'll get dive into our conversation for today. So, Erin, hand it over.
Hi, I'm Erin Latham, and I'm an artist and educator living and working in Oklahoma. I'm currently working on a PhD in my dissertation writing phase with the Institute of Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts. And I'm writing about the artist collective and artists working in collectivity as kind of a singularity and something that we should be paying attention to. So that's just a little bit about me.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So we're going to just dive right in. So today on this issue for the podcast, we're going to be talking about a show on Netflix, kind of like a docu-series. It's called Amend, The Fight for America. So did you guys have a chance to watch it, George and Phil?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Some, not all, so.
Okay.
Hey, that's a start. We'll dive right into that. Okay, so George, you're gonna be first on the chopping block since you're a legal background. Okay, so what were your thoughts on the show? So just a little bit about it. It's a 6 hour docu series or whatever, and it talks a bit about the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which was ratified in 1868. George, jump in at any time and tell me if I'm right or wrong.
You're right.
But it talks about how it was granting citizenship to all persons born or naturalized within the United States, which was inclusive of former slaves, and then it guaranteed equal protection from the of these laws to the citizens, whether they were born or naturalized citizens within the United States. And then of the 14th Amendment, there are addendums that was basically attached to them that deals with the citizenship, deals with women's rights and different things like that. So that's a summation for the most part of the series. If you have an opportunity, check it out. It's an amazing series. So George, what is your thoughts? You're it.
I thought it was a very interesting thing. And the thing is that I watched it on Saturday and then this morning. And every time I watch it, it's different. So, of course, it's a series. But it also lets you into this idea that the American society is a society of the 14th Amendment. It has been shaped by that single amendment, because just about it is the affecting part of the Constitution. It is the one that makes possible a lot of the things that we cherish, the values, things that shape our values. The Bill of Rights, for example, from the first to the Eighth Amendment. All of those are not self-executing as part of the Constitution, and they're only effectuated. They're the ones that are they're applied through the 14th Amendment. So it's it's about equal protection. If you look at it, a 14th Amendment is basically the one that brings forth what the preamble of this Constitution was all about. You cannot have the rights to the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness if it cannot be effectuated. And the 14th Amendment is the one that does that. And initially, of course, it was about ensuring that African Americans get the rights that are promised in the Constitution. But then it is one that has been used to I don't want to use the word expand, because if you believe, as the framers of the Constitution believe, that we have God-given right to a lot of the things that we cherish, then what the Constitution is doing and what the 14th Amendment is doing is basically to reclaim, to affirm those rights against situations where some people believe that affirming those rights negates their right to live, their right to enjoy their own happiness. So it's a very interesting. So there are two. Well, the 14th Amendment, of course, and it has 4 parts or 5 parts. But the one that is most that we use most is the first section, and in that you have that the citizenship right, on the basis of either birthright or you're born here or you're naturalized. But at the same time, it grants that equality. What it does not do is that it does not allow somebody who is in the country and is not a citizen, or rather, those who are out of the country and are not citizens, the right to claim anything, which is interesting. It's interesting because if you are in this country, the 14th Amendment will still give you certain protections, but not others. Right. You don't have protections of citizenship, but you have protections of equal. You have equal protection in time. For example, police cannot come and just arrest you without due process. So it's a very interesting thing. I really loved that. I thought it was well done, and I'm at that point whereby we are in the 60s, and Martin Luther King talking about I didn't know that it was Brian who brought in the concept of nonviolence to Martin.
Yeah. It was there was a lot of pieces to it that I didn't know about, certain aspects of history that Erin and I was back and forth. She had to call me she was like, what the F, Angela, what is happening? Because there was a lot of things that I think about certain people within our history, they were put up to be put on a pedestal, and like Abraham Lincoln, for example, or thought that he really wanted to help free the slaves and so forth. But when we looked at some of the wording from some of his letters and correspondence back and forth with some of the different legislators and people within their time, it all came down to about capitalism. It came down to the aspect of no, we think that Black people and white people should still be segregated. We think that certain people have more rights than others, or some don't have rights at all. So that was very interesting. Bits and pieces that I didn't know about American history that is not readily taught within classes. I came across a lot of information that was new to me, I will have to say. Phil, what about some of the stuff that you came across within the series episodes that you've seen so far?
I think that the most affecting for me, the second episode, talking about how within less than a decade of the passage of the 14th Amendment, its intentions were pretty much subverted by a combination of political cowardice and a campaign of organized terror and violence in the South. Because if this hadn't happened, if Reconstruction had been allowed to continue, I mean, who knows how much pain and suffering over the next 90 years could have been averted. And in a larger sense, what it says, and I think the whole series kind of talks to that, I'm kind of, extrapolating from what the parts of it that I have seen, is that this has been a constant struggle. It really predates the 14th Amendment and certainly continued long after that up to the present day, that there is this push-pull within America as to how much, what people are allowed to fully partake of all the rights and freedoms that other people in this country take for granted. And, and at every step of the way, there has been resistance, often highly organized resistance to this concept that there is still this idea among some people that some of us count more than others, that some people should not have power, or that if that group gets power, group is to lose power. And whether it's men against women, Black against white, Native against immigrant, Christian against non-Christian. I mean, this is a constant theme that we see played out. Certainly over the last 4 years, we saw it played out, but it's always been there. And it's a struggle that really hasn't been completely resolved up until the present moment.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Your perspective that you have on it. So let me just go through the different series right quick. So it's 6 different elements to the series. So the first one is on citizenship, which talks about escaping slavery. Frederick Douglass becomes a prominent voice for Black Americans. And then the second one is about resistance, which after the ratification, court rulings and lost cause ideology subverts the 14th Amendment. The third episode is as the civil rights gains prominent movement, Martin Luther King orchestrates the protests, and him and President John F. Kennedy go back and forth with correspondence and changes within that. The fourth one is Control, which addresses women issues and women appeal to evolve interpretation of the 14th Amendment. The fifth episode deals with same-sex marriage and equality, culminates on is based upon an Ohio case. And then the last one deals more so with immigrants and their long push for hope within America and the intolerant policies and different things like that. And there were several different court cases that came about. So we have the Brown versus Board of Education case, the Loving versus Virginia case, the Plessy versus Ferguson, the United States versus Juan Kim Ark case. And Erin, I'm gonna pose this question to you. Of the information that was in the different episodes and the fact that individuals, we're all basically human. We're all human under have that understanding, concept, and thought process. Why is it, do you think, that certain individuals, based upon the Constitution, based upon the wording and everything that are within these amendments, why do you feel that there are certain individuals that are deemed lesser than others?
Well, I will say that I think the big takeaway from the series that I have a lot of feelings around it. Angela's heard quite a few of these in the last week as we've been watching it. But I think the big takeaway for me is that the way that the information is presented in this docuseries is so clear. Like it's clear from the beginning of what happened in America to what's happening now, and you can really see the thread all the way through as far as like our history is important. It's important to every individual because we participate in it still. And I think that's the big problem I have with my own education in history classes when I think back to when I was learning about American history and how it was presented as this thing that happened that doesn't live in the present day. And I think that creates a situation where a lot of people, particularly people who look like me, are able to disconnect from their history and from the history of the United States, and then other people can easily create a divide between, me and you and us and them and things like that. And I think it's really awful. It's totally awful. And what I found myself doing during this series often was, like seeing that could occur, but also like knowing that that's not how it should be, and like challenging myself to think about my own like situations where I create other, or where, and I think that that's a really hard thing for people to do. But I mean, I think that speaks to why there is this driving narrative in the way history is presented. There is a driving narrative that like everything's great, we didn't do anything wrong, like America was founded on great principles, and it's like, no, actually we've been really pretty tumultuous since the beginning. And that's an important it's an important thing that is still living in today, and I think that that's a really powerful thing to give people. And I think that series kind of does that.
Yeah.
The series does that.
Yeah, I think that just based upon some of the cases that were in there, and Phil, I'm probably going to ask you and George about this with your experiences in journalism, and your many travels around the world. Um, Although America compared to other countries, and there are countries that are much younger than America, do you think that America is actually any different in terms of our history and also in terms of how we educate within our system, in terms of withholding certain knowledge to individuals about this stuff?
I think, and I would agree with you, Angela and Erin, that we have been fed this kind of triumphalist narrative of American history in public schools. At least that was the case maybe up until recently. I mean, as the parent of two school-age kids, I can certainly say that at least on the high school level, they're getting a more complicated and nuanced picture, I think. I don't know if at the lower, let's say at the elementary school levels, the kids are still being fed the same old about that. It's harder at that age, I think, to kind of convey that sort of nuance to kids. But in any event, at least at the upper levels, I think, at least here in liberal New York, they're making an effort to correct that to some degree. But yeah, I mean, it's a powerful narrative, and I think it's obviously it's a flawed narrative. I'm not saying it's totally false, but I think that the idea that it's been just one series of triumphs after another, and not talking about the dark side, has been somewhat destructive. And you see that played out, especially I think among conservatives in this country. There was a reason why in one of the presidential debates last year, Trump started, condemning the push to include the Times 1619 project, the New York Times, talking about the origins of slavery and its continuing impact on this country. And he's not the only one to use this kind of rhetoric about, oh, they want us to hate America, they want to say America is evil. I mean, honestly, what I take away from efforts like the 1619 project is simply an attempt to tell a full story. I mean, in response to your question about how we relate to the rest of the world, I mean, obviously I think we can say we're not perfect. No nation on this earth is perfect. The one thing that I still hold on to is the fact that the founding ethos of this country was based on certain ideas and ideals and concepts that most nations did not begin with. Most nations began with just, hey, there's a group of us here, we're on this area of land, okay, we all know each other, we're connected, we have a similar race and religion and so forth, okay, let's just stay here. This is one of the few countries, the only other one I can think of perhaps is Israel, that was founded on an idea. And I think the struggle in this country has been how true to remain to that idea, how to live up to the founding ideals. We've often fallen short, but the fact of having those ideals in the first place, I think, makes a bit of a difference. That's just my feeling. That's how I define my own kind of patriotism in this country. Not to say that we never made mistakes or even committed crimes, but that at least there has been this effort to address them that is continuing to the present day.
George, what's your thoughts?
Angela, you started with, there's something that you said that is very profound. You talked about capitalism as foundational to this series as well. It's foundational to the founding of the country, over and above the maybe I don't know. I don't want to equate, but it's one of the foundations of the country, the capitalism. Beyond the other values that we're talking about, that are enumerated in the Constitution, and it's important because in many other countries, we may think that America is separate is only the place where all these things are happening. But that is not true, because there are reasons for just about everything. The American situation is just a little on the microscope because of so many other reasons. I remember a couple of years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I was at Oxford, and we had this debate about what America was doing. And all the Europeans were all talking about how bad America was. And all the American students basically went underground. And I had to stand up and tell them that Europe is not any better. The reason we don't have these skirmishes and struggles in Europe is because the Black population in Europe is so minuscule that they are forced to minority, not just Black, even Asians, they are forced to conform. They are forced to be part of the broader population. And so they cannot exercise their rights. They cannot say that they are different, or they cannot campaign against the broader narrative. In all those countries, I have seen that minorities suffer as well. One of the most glaring examples is South Africa, which partly got its brutality from the United States, copying Jim Crow laws and copying the segregations of the early 20th century of this country. But think about South Africa having been founded in the history of the white South Africans in 1652 by Jan van Riebeeck. Even though at that time, the San, the so-called Bushmen, the San were already there. There were already so many others. And so we cannot say that the United States is the only one that has this problem. There is this drama that has played out for the past 400 years, which is different from anywhere else outside of South Africa. And that is why, and partly because of that, and also the fact that the population of Blacks in this country is bigger. And because it's bigger, there is the numbers to make their feelings felt, their ideas felt. So they are vocal more than any other country. And in fact, the same could be said in Brazil, where you have a lot of minorities, but they don't have this kind of activism that we have in the United States. And that goes back to the Constitution. It goes back to the courts, how the courts have always looked at these cases. And of course, the 14th Amendment didn't come out of nowhere. It already came out of situations that had been going on before that. I think Dred Scott was there. You had 1920s, the Compromise, the Missouri Compromise, which it was just as bad. And in an attempt to resolve all this situation, you have what Phil was talking about, which is one step forward, one step back. And I think the series talks about there's a revolution, a counter-revolution. It always happens, and that we should expect that to happen even right now. We saw how it happened. The response to Obama's election. We had Trump, right, which reminded me of what was going on during the Reconstruction. And now we see the white nationalists, trying. Today was supposed to be a hearing in Congress, but they cannot because the intelligence was showing that they were going to be attacked. So the Supreme Court gives you this, or rather, the Constitution gives you certain rights, but then those rights have to be affected. And the problem is that they have to be affected through certain mechanisms. And those mechanisms are basically people trying to do that. And when people refuse to do that, then you have these problems coming up.
So why, what, so my question, in regards to rights, certain people have certain rights, others are not given that or warranted those same rights. Why do you think that that's a challenge? Why do you think that it's a problem? Because when we talk about the Constitution and talk about the preamble, we the people, in order to, you know, be a part of the system, talking about certain inalienable rights, liberty, life, justice, all of that. Why are only certain people integrated in that understanding of we the people?
Because of threat. I think I read about that somewhere. There's this philosophy of threat. Man feels threatened all the time. And for white Americans, and particularly those that are in this part of space, this space where they think that equality for somebody else means a loss for them. So they are threatened by minorities coming out. The essential minority is African American, and then other minorities since then, they've been doing this, the same thing because they are threatened of losing their power. They are threatened of losing their power. Now that power is manifested in so many ways. And so they have to fight. It's a fight to the death, you know, what is Nietzsche talking about? You have to fight to get your freedom and, you know, the dialectics. So I think because everybody wants to lead their lives and to benefit from peace and quiet and pursuit of happiness, others think that doing that for others would be a loss for on their part. And you look at this country, the way it was created and the way, you know, yes, there was this concept of people coming over because they were running away from the king. But I've always believed that in essence, part of that was about, you know, making money. And the only way to make money was to go and get cheap labor. And, you know, when the Native Americans could not provide that labor, they went and got labor from somewhere else and they brought it. And it was making, they were making good money off it. And so if your life is around money, if your life is around this economic development, and you think that if taking the black man away from that diminishes you, then this is what comes to pass. It's always been the same thing, you know. People are scared. It reminds me about something, just to close it up, that there's somebody called Achille Mbembe. He's at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. He talks about the concept of immigration and geography. That if God put us in this world, why do we think that we have ownership to spaces, and particular geographical spaces, so that we can create an us versus them?
Right.
And it goes into this concept of ratio. So we're in America, as the series says, you know, even Lincoln himself was thinking, yes, I want to save the Union. And if that means, I don't want slavery, yes, but I want to save the Union first. If that means taking blacks to Costa Rica, so be it. And it wasn't until Frederick Douglass said no that he joined Douglass in this cause of abolitionism. So it's a very interesting concept.
Yeah, George, I think I would agree that, while I don't agree with some of the people in San Francisco who are trying to strip Lincoln's name from schools and other public places, I think that, but we can have what I said before about, nuance, a more nuanced view of Lincoln. The fact is that, yeah, he was originally fighting the war to preserve the Union. Slavery did not come into it until later on, where it was partly the pressure of Douglas and others, and partly the sense that, okay, this would kind of give more of an incentive. I think at one point he was considering the idea that he would threaten the South, basically say, if you don't surrender, I'm going to pass this proclamation. I'm going to, free all of your slaves, whether you like it or not. So there were complex factors at work. I think that Lincoln stood in for a number of, or symbolic of a number of white Americans of his day who understood that slavery was a bad thing, a morally wrong thing, but were not willing to fight a war on behalf of it, that kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, we can say that, and that doesn't make him a demon. That doesn't take away from the fact that he did liberate the slaves, and that, had he lived, from all accounts, he was planning to continue with the project of Reconstruction, and hopefully might have, seen it to fruition, and kind of influenced his party to continue to enforce it, rather than pulling out the troops, as happened in 1877. So that's very true. But I also agree with you when you say that capitalism, I mean, you can't take away the economic factor from a lot of the negative developments in this country, from slavery to, discrimination against immigrants to, what have you. It wouldn't have happened if we weren't a capitalist country, probably, but then, we haven't seen such good results in non-capitalist countries either. I guess that, again, and this is something that the 1619 Project addressed that I found especially fascinating: the ties between the economic history of this country and the history of racism and other forms of exclusion. I mean, you can't separate the two. It's a factor. It's definitely a factor.
Yeah, I think that Erin, I'm sorry, and I'm definitely going to bring this back to you, but in regards to the image that they have put up with regards to Lincoln, and Phil, this kind of to your point, the fact that he was trying to preserve the Union and keep all of that in kind of like in a nice little box or whatever for the most part, but he was. The fact that I think within American history, them trying to wipe out certain folks' names out of the history book and basically rewrite history is another way to look at it. I don't think that that's a good thing. I don't think that you should just only glorify certain aspects within history. I think you need to show the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of in history. And I remember one time when I don't know if George and Erin, if you remember with this, when we were in Berlin and they were talking about their educational system and how they do talk about the Holocaust and how they talk about, this was a dark time in our history, and they really, really push it and promote it. And I thought that was a really, really cool thing because they were like, yes.
Angela, you know what? Here is the thing. I remember that very well because I told them they were whitewashing it as well. Because the Herero, the Germans had a colony called Southwest Africa, and they murdered the Herero, women and children, so bad. And on that occasion in Berlin, she was saying that, oh, we had 500 people who died. And I had to tell her, no, there were 500,000 people that you guys killed. And I'm happy that you have that as part of your history. You are not acknowledging that, but you're not acknowledging everything. Because the numbers are not there. And there's a debate in Germany, particularly in Berlin, about the naming of the streets. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. No, I appreciate that. And that's, Erin, I'm gonna hand it over to you. But when we talk about you know, specifically since you're in the K-12 system and working with the younger kids in school system, and just some of the information that you came across within these series, but then also other conversations that you had about, or new information that you even came to with regards to your own state of Oklahoma. Why do you think within the education system, and now as an adult we're finding out all this information, how do you think that it should be integrated within the school system to teach a more fuller perspective of American history? And then a second question would be, why do you think that there's a hesitance to fully educate young people to be activists for the most part, in support of going and supporting the civil rights of all human people?
Yeah, man, that's a really big topic that I've been thinking a lot about, as you know, as a citizen of the United States, but also as a citizen of Oklahoma, and growing up in the public education system here. I will say my experience with K-12 education is sort of outside the sphere of public education. So I'm an art teacher who kind of comes into the public schools and then gets to create my own curriculum, which opens up a much broader, you know, conversation. I can pull in artists who are not normally spoken about or talk about things in different ways than I think educators can probably do, that are stuck to this specific core, you know, structure. And I can't really speak for their experience, but I do see, like what Bill had said earlier, his kids who are in a little bit older grades are probably getting a broader education of what actually has happened in our country, why things are happening now. From my limited experience with K through 12, you know, it tends to be a lot of the same, you know, I think it's harder to teach kids about atrocities, but I also think that, I mean, I was in 7th grade and I remember vividly many units on the Holocaust. I mean, so much so that it's like, it was a very like affecting thing that I learned about and still remember to this day. Can remember back in my memory of that feeling of learning about that stuff. So I don't think it's something that, you know, when something horrible occurs in our history, I think it's important to learn about it because it creates empathy, right? Like it creates empathy in the person who's learning about it. So that, I mean, that for me is something I think about often. I also think about the things I didn't learn, particularly as an Oklahoman, the Tulsa Race Massacre. I didn't know about that until college. And I'm from Oklahoma. I live about an hour and a half away from where that occurred. So it's pretty shocking that, you know, and then you're angry. I mean, I just, as a person who lives in this state, like it hurts that we weren't taught these things. But it's not surprising as an adult that we weren't, because I don't know, I see it as just, there is some sort of narrative that is pushed that they're not always, I mean, whoever they is, like who's writing the textbooks, who gets to decide what the students learn. I think that says a lot about like what we learn, I guess, is how I'm thinking about it, in terms of you know, where we're going and what we're allowed to learn. And to your second question, Angela, about students as activists, or why we're not taught towards that. I mean, I think, yeah, if I had watched a series like this Amends series in high school, like, you know, 16-year-old Erin would have been radicalized at a much earlier age, I think, you know, because it's really frustrating that there's this, I don't know, I think it's like a created divide that is made, right? Where we're not encouraged to see ourselves as others, right? we're encouraged to create the divide. And I think that speaks to George's point about capitalism earlier. You know, I mean, there is this desire to separate, right? There's a desire to get what's yours, and if someone else gets it, then you lose it. And I think that that's an awful narrative, and it's really hard. It's hard to labor under, you know. I mean, and it's hard to have empathy for others. So in this system, but
So what can we do as educators, because George, you teach on the college level.
Right.
Phil, you teach on the college level, correct?
No, I work at a college, but I don't,
Work in a college.
Yeah.
How can we, as individuals that have this information and then passing it along to our younger generation and folks, how can we, where we are now, knowing more information that we had than our past generations, because we have access to more information, how can we move the narrative along to make it better, so we can be a part of this fight and not have those who are marginalized, whether they be immigrants, whether they be part of the LGBT community? How can we push the narrative along to make it better for the others so they won't feel othered?
Phil,
I
you want to
think
go
that
first?
Phil, go ahead. Yes, Phil.
Yeah.
it's going to be challenging because I do think you want to avoid the traps of kind of being, you want to present a warts and all picture, but at the same time, not make the student so depressed or nihilistic or whatever that he or she says, okay, this is all crap. This country is all crap. Its history is all crap, and there's no reason to, I should just move somewhere else to Canada. It's a question of kind of what we emphasize and yet the way we present it. It's very interesting, George, what you were saying before about Germany. And I was thinking it's kind of ironic that they will talk so much about the Holocaust, that there's been so much about the Holocaust that we kind of like forget, oh, there were also these massacres of Black people in Africa. That was another thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, I will say in their favor. I mean, as I think one of you was saying, they do teach it. They teach the Holocaust at least thoroughly in the curriculum. And what you don't see are statues of Hitler. You don't see military bases named after Erwin Rommel or other, Nazi military leaders. I mean, they have not moved these people. They've not erased the whole era from the history books, but they have put it in the context of, how awful it was. And hopefully they teach how it arose and perhaps how it can be prevented from happening again. And I think what we need to do in this country and in the education system is something similar. As you were saying, Angela, we can't just erase people and events, but we don't have to have statues of Confederate heroes. We don't have to have military bases named after Confederate generals. We have to get rid of this idea, the remnants of this lost cause mythology that there was, the Civil War was all about states' rights or economic issues. I mean, that may have played into it, but at its core, 11 American states withdrew from the nation with the basic purpose of preserving slavery in those states and creating a slaveholders' republic, if you can call it a republic. That can't be denied. And I think, it also can't be denied that once they were brought back into the fold, they created this, they launched this long-term campaign on several levels, from physical violence to political pressure to this kind of media narrative of the lost cause that tried to turn back the clock on full equality in this country. You can't deny that either. What you can say is that, okay, this happened, but even as it was happening, there were constant movements on the other side to resist, to try to overcome it, that you had the founding of the NAACP, you had, other organizations, you had legal pushes, you had this going on. So that it wasn't like there was this gap between the end of Reconstruction and the rise of Dr. King. And the same, you could say that for all the other movements, if you look into them, for women, for gays, for immigrants, and all that. And I think that's the most constructive way moving forward, to tell people, look, we can't deny that there has been a lot of this negativity, a lot of this oppression, a lot of this violence. But at every step of the way, there were Americans who were fighting to change things and make things better. And I think if you look at it in those terms, the average student will be left with not only a complete picture, but a picture that he or she can ultimately, take with them and take the idea of, okay, we're at this point, there's been a constant struggle and the struggle's not over, and what's the role that I can play in it?
Awesome. George, what you thought?
I think I agree with Phil. I'm slow to come to this. I'm very deliberate when it comes to the issue of this issue, because first of all, let me start with the thing that I wanted to say, which is that what should we be doing? Well, let's continue to do what we are doing, which is being active. For those who are going to the streets, continue to do that. For those who are teaching, teach alternative history as well. When I talk about alternative history, I mean history that has been left behind. Because it seems to me that history is a contested area, and the power that dominates is what determines what history is. And around the world, and I start with South Africa, which is involved in the process of rewriting its own history. And that comes to the United States as well, whereby if you look around, if you go to the bookstores, you see a lot of writing, and a lot of those writings are coming out of, that scholarship is coming out of young Black scholars. And they don't have to be scholars alone. If you can write, you should write. If you can teach, you should teach, and teach all the things that were left behind to bring history to its completion, because this history is not complete even as it goes forward. I agree, of course, with what Phil was saying. The glorification of the lost cause and the idea of, having statues and monuments for rebellious soldiers and rebellious states. The problem is that they put those monuments in public spaces for a reason. And the reason is to cause fear, to ensure that the Black person continues to understand their place, which is to negate continually the benefits of the 14th Amendment. True. But then again, if we come and say we get rid of Lee, who is to say that the next person may not come and get rid of Martin Luther King?
Right.
And so as long as you chose to have those monuments in public spaces, which all of us are paying taxes for, then we also can bring other monuments to counteract those monuments. And so if we have having the school system, parks, public buildings as spaces of dialogue, then let's have dialogue in all of its manifestations. But all of us have to continue to do what we're doing, which is to fight. And that fight takes the form of write your books, teach, go to the streets if you can. Because if you don't do anything, you're basically you're stealing from the rest of those who are fighting. You're getting your freedom, you're getting your rights for free because somebody else is fighting for it. And this applies not just to minorities, but to whites as well. This idea of juxtaposition of my position as a white person, his position or her position as a Black person or an Asian American or whatever the kind of category that is there, is not good. the either or, I have to exist or you don't. Why can't we all be part of the same thing? So I agree with all of you, but I also think that we have a job to do. And the job to do is to continue to fight in our own ways for a better future.
Erin, you want to add to that?
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think that George's point about, like, let's have the other part of the conversation, right? Like, let's tell the whole story, not just the planted view of one side of the story of history. I think is really vital to the conversation. I also think, you know, yeah, it's on the shoulders of everybody, and that can feel very weighing. You know, it can feel very like I have to solve all the problems, you know, as a well-meaning white person. But it also distributes the weight amongst all of us when, you know, people of color and minorities have been carrying it for us for far too long. And I mean, that's really where I'm at in this discussion. So yeah, on a personal note, when I am writing curriculum for art students, I'm trying to think about representation. Let's talk about artists who aren't in the artistic canon. Let's talk about, you know, along with those artists, because they were important for some reason and we need to talk about them. But yeah, I mean, representation of my students, I think, is vital, because I try to think about myself as a young girl, right? I wanted to see myself in the things I was reading, in the artists and art I was making and seeing, and so I mean, that's where it comes from me, is just trying to tell the whole story, I guess. And I don't generally focus, you know, totally on history when it comes to art making, but I also think that experience, particularly in art making, is really important for students, and everybody can have that experience. So it is kind of an open-ended situation where, yeah, I mean, I can add in those conversations for sure. And then the other thing I thought that was really, you know, interesting and should be noted about this documentary series that started this conversation is yeah, I mean, the idea that, like, we're all part of the conversation, like George said, and we all have a duty, and that seemed to be really like what wrapped up the whole series. I also find myself, you know, in that call to action, in that call to do your part and to keep moving it forward. There is the insinuation too, the idea that, you know, that there are structures in place that keep us from moving it forward. So I think that's a question I have all the time, is how to go as far as I can, but what happens when I'm stopped from going any further, I guess, with the institution or the structure. But that's a big topic, I guess. But.
Yeah, I think my takeaway from the whole series, and I am in agreement with everyone on the panel today, is the fact that I think everybody has a part that they play in to the elements of history, and only each individual can say for themselves what that part is, because I can give a role to somebody, but if you're not going to play the part and play it fullest, I'd rather you not be a part of the whole thing. But I think it comes down to you knowing as an individual what's important, what matters to you, because within history and within just where we are now specifically in this time, a lot of things, we're having to unlearn a lot of stuff. We're having to come to terms with what's important to us, how we see ourselves positioned to the next person, and what we want to do better for the future generations. And I think that just where we are, realizing that past generations, they didn't have all the answers, they didn't get it right. But I think for us, it causes us to be active, engaged, and realize that, you know, we have to make it better to keep it moving forward. And I think that within these series, like this docu-series, there was a lot of stuff that I found very informative. And specifically when we were talking about the women's issues in one of the series that they were addressing, I think there was a lot of, on both sides, the conversation was similar, but everybody thought they were saying something different, but they was basically saying the same thing. And I think that's just why the dialogue is very important to keep things moving forward. And throughout all of this, I think that each individual, whether, you know, they're addressing LGBT issues, women issues, immigrant issues, you have to understand how you situate yourself in this whole circle of what humanity is. And the thing that comes to mind, I always think about, and I always get the guy's name wrong, so you guys correct me. I think it's Martin Niemöller. When he talking, Niemöller, and they came, for me, that is a very important a piece of it became a poem or so, but it was actually a speech that he wrote in terms of how they came for this individual, and there was nobody to speak up, but then they finally came up for me, and nobody was there to speak up for me. So I think that that's one of the things that I keep in front of me and keep important in my actions and activity and being a part of social justice, and always acting out and being making myself a part of the conversation, because I would want someone to speak up for me. And I believe that it's my duty and right as a part of humanity, a part of the, you know, humankind, to speak up for others, because some people have not found their voice yet. And I just want, as loud as I am, I have to be able to speak up for others. So I think that's the important takeaway that I took from this whole series. And I know that we're running out of time and coming to the close of the series, but it's been a very good conversation. I enjoyed the different perspectives with everybody, and very informative. And if you have the time to fully watch the series Amend on Netflix, it is a very, very good series to check out, because it covers a lot of different things in regards to the 14th Amendment. So definitely check it out on Netflix, because they're supposed to be taking it down soon. Don't know why, but they're taking it down.
Why?
Soon. I don't know. They said it's a limited series, so it's not going to be up for a while. So make sure you go watch it before they take it down. So I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. So join us again next time for the next episode, as we continue to explore contemporary issues and how they impact our culture. And please, 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 please do not forget to share and subscribe to our podcast. So thank you, guys.